Oh, I had to bring back the sunglasses for this one. Extremis. Extremis? I'm going with Extremis. Oh, coming off the back of Oxygen, another really, really good episode. This is another one, again, much like Oxygen, where the more I think about it, the more I pick it apart and examine it, the stronger it becomes. It's funny, there are plenty of things out there, not just Doctor Who, plenty of pieces of entertainment out there that when you start sorting through it and picking at it and pulling at the threads, it kind of falls apart. Doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that like maybe the fun was papering over stuff that it was like, don't notice this. And if it did its job well, then you didn't notice. But then you go back and look more closely and you're like, oh, right. Then there are other things where you start to pick at it and you realize, oh, this is way more tightly knit than I thought it was. Wow! And Extremis kind of has that going on, which I'm always happy to find if I can. So this is the one that opened. Well, first of all, we have holdover from the last one. The Doctor is still blind. I love that. I love that there were lasting consequences to the event of Oxygen, just on principle. I love that. And I also love the way that they deal with it. I love that the Doctor is using the sonic specs as a workaround, but it's a deeply flawed and imperfect workaround. It's played for humor at a couple points, but it also becomes a logistical hurdle along the way. And it's super respectful, I think, in a way that sci-fi often isn't, to the nature of trying to deal with a disability. Because oftentimes when you're dealing with fantasy or science fiction, when somebody has a disability, they end up having some sort of ability, remedy, piece of tech, whatever, that effectively eliminates the problem. And like maybe it's a little bit different than if they still had the natural ability that most people do, but for the most part, they can function as if they did. You know, think Geordie LaForge or any cybernetic limb on any number of characters from any friggin' anime or sci-fi thing ever. Here, this is much more reminiscent of what is actually like to try and compensate for disability. Well, to my understanding, I get able-bodied person. If I am getting this wrong, I'm sure someone will correct me. But at least to my understanding of it, which is that you can't just replace the thing you lost with something that does the exact same thing. If you're lucky, you can replace it with something that does kind of the same thing, but like it's going to come up short in a lot of areas. The ways in which, you know, a prosthetic limb or being confined to a wheelchair. Yeah, you can still move around, but it's not like you still have use of your legs. So the fact that it can give him the outline and the shape of a room. It can identify people. It can give him information about those people, age, height, you know, all this stuff. But he can't read a book because he can't do text. It's basically like sonar in a way. It's still very limited, and there's a bunch of information he's not getting. And he has to try and work around that. So I like that for, you know, again, lasting consequences, but it just feels like a more respectful way to try and depict someone compensating for loss of function in some area. So moving on from that, this thing, it has a bookend. Well, I say bookend. It pops up across it as it goes along in a way that doesn't completely cleanly integrate. I'd actually forgotten that this was the episode where we establish what happened with Missy and that it is Missy in the vault. I'd forgotten that this was that same episode, largely because it doesn't intermix with the primary story. It doesn't interfere with it either, but it doesn't complement it. I feel like that aspect of the story is in this episode because this was about the point in the series where they had to get it in there. So they just found a way to get it in and just tried to have it not interrupt the other story as much as possible. And honestly, I do think they pulled that off, but I would have really liked if they could have found a way or a point at which to bring in this information about Missy and have it flow more organically into the concepts or the themes of the primary story being told. And that doesn't really happen here. That said, in isolation, the stuff is still really good. Like, I love this whole concept of these people who their whole thing is knowing how to kill every single kind of sentient life in the universe. And that they take a ton of pride in this, that they have all this information on how to kill anything. Like, that's just a cool concept. And oftentimes when I say that about something that's very much a side thing in Doctor Who, I find myself going, I kind of wish there was more that they'd done with it. Honestly, I'm not sure there's more that you could have done with that other than this. I feel like this is actually the perfect amount of time to be with people where that's your concept. They are basically executioners for hire because they can kill anything. Not like in a mercenary badass way, just you have captured something that you need killed? Okay, we can tell you how to do it. Sort of way. And I don't think there was more that you could or needed to milk out of that concept. So that works really well. I think I'm gonna address that whole thing here so I don't have to circle back to it at the end, even though in the episode it does come back at the end, which that's the one thing where I will say is slightly not disruptive, but loses momentum, because the climax of the episode overall is very strongly the Doctor emailing himself and getting the information. And then, we have a natural sort of wrap up and denouement, to sound really pretentious, with Bill, establishing the real Bill and all of that. But then it keeps going because we have to pick up on Missy and establish firmly that she's not dead and she's in the vault and the Doctor has to watch her for 1,000 years. Some of which I'm not sure needed to be firmly established. Like, they set up this whole thing so the Doctor can say, like, I'm going to watch her body, and then it turns out the body's not dead. But, like, hadn't we pretty cleanly already established that whatever was in the vault was alive? I mean, it had knocked back. The Doctor had a one-sided, admittedly, conversation with it. I think we kind of knew something was alive in there, so I don't know why they try and play that like it's a twist or a surprise that she's not dead. I don't know. But, again, like, that stuff in isolation, for the most part, works. It's solid, but let's get to the meat of it. So, the initial concept, the initial idea of this one truth about the world, that anyone who learns it commits suicide. First off, that's a killer hook. I mean, it's borderline Lovecraftian. That idea of, like, the truth will drive you mad. So I love that vibe. Secondly, that's the kind of setup that is almost impossible to pay off satisfactorily. It's the kind of premise and starting question that you're like, ooh, I can't wait to find out the answer. And the answer is almost always a disappointment. It doesn't quite live up to what it should have been. I think this answer is perfect for that setup, though. Especially the way that they play it and the way that it gets revealed. And here's the big thing, sticking with Bill. Because here's the thing. If you watch sci-fi, much sci-fi at all, especially TV shows, you've seen plenty of times where people who turn out to be androids, holograms, mental projections, whatever, have this sort of moment of crisis of, wait, are you saying I'm not real? And it almost never lands the way it's intended to. Because pretty much anytime any other show does it, those people are appearing only in the episode that they're in, or in the case of the movie, like, we've only known them a couple hours, and more of it's virtually never the main character. It's not our eyes. It's not our point of view character. Now, Bill, we've already gotten to know across multiple episodes, and this thing sticks with her as the reality of all this sinks in. And I love that it takes the time to slow down. It doesn't act like, ooh, rug pull, it's a twist. Like, no. We're going to wait and see if you catch on to this. And then if you don't, we'll lay it out for you. But even after we've laid it out, there was that conversation in the White House between the Doctor and Bill. And that is slow. That is thoughtful. That is perfectly pitched, because you can see all of it sinking on her, weighing on her, this idea of, but I have to be real. And you feel the pain of that realization that she isn't. I felt that here way harder than I have ever felt it in any other thing I've ever seen pull the, oh my God, am I real on a character before. I've never seen it hit as hard as this hits it. It's so well executed. And like, it tracks. Like, the more I think about it, like, once it's been proven to you, once you know, and that number test is also freaking brilliant. Once you know it's true, yeah, I would believe people would remove themselves from the situation. Because nothing else that they have ever measured themselves by, no amount of personal success, ambition, family, creative works, nothing, none of it matters. So the only choice you can make that matters is to not play the game anymore. And I love that the comparison is made to video games repeatedly and early on. Again, like how tightly knit this thing is. So when the Doctor first encounters the monks and he says,
"This is not a game. This is a game. Good, because I win."
And you think it's metaphorical. They're playing with him. They're telling him, no, literally. This whole thing is a game. And that sort of white space place with the portals, that's basically the hub world where they can step into the different levels that they've created. And like, there's so much tension when Nardole puts his hand outside the projectors and realizes he's not real. And he's panicked at that. And again, the weight of it on Bill and having that carry over to the next scene. Oh, like I said, that setup of what's one truth that would have virtually every single person on the planet have ultimately the same reaction. You know, maybe some people would kill themselves immediately. Some people would try and, do something, to make it more momentous. Or like in the case of the one person who translated the Veritas, get the word to other people before. But, ultimately would do that. Like, yeah, I buy it. Because if you truly know that you are not real, whether that hits you like a sledgehammer immediately and you want out, or whether you're trying to hold on and the weight of that fact drags you down over time, yeah, I do believe that everyone will make that same decision ultimately if that was true, if that was what happened. This is a very specific kind of horror that I don't know where else I've seen it, but like, this is the horror and the tragedy of unreality. I feel like in a lot of ways this episode is not as well remembered as it should be. Because, and maybe that's because it feeds into the next two-parter, which tends to have a much more mixed reaction. But look, honestly, it sets that up. But this is a proper standalone story, and it's a really, really good one. And I'd honestly forgotten that this was the origin point for
without hope,
without witness,
without reward.
You do it not because you have hope that it'll work. You do it not because you're being watched by people who will judge you. You don't do it because you're going to be rewarded. You do it because it's the right thing or because it's the only thing you can do. And I love that is introduced by Nardole. I love that it is River Song's words. I love that it is what spurns the Doctor on to email himself. I love that the monks basically cooked their own goose by making a digital version of the Doctor that is pretty much as clever as the Doctor. Like, oops, that was a mistake. You shouldn't have done that. I love the idea that the Doctor temporarily borrows eyesight when doesn't know the price. Like he said, like, maybe my next regeneration will be blind. Maybe I won't be able to regenerate at all. Maybe I'll drop dead in 20 minutes. I love this idea that he is so intent on finding out what this is that he's prepared to basically pull the lever on a random number generator for something that it's going to cost him. He doesn't know what it is, but he's like, I'll pay it. I don't know what, but I'll pay it. Like that, again, the tension involved in this. There's also some great lighter moments. Like I love the establishing of Nardole as kind of a secret badass while still being the goofy kind of guy that Nardole is. That's great stuff. Also, this along with Look Me Up from the Forest of the Dead is about the one other time that it does work for me when the Doctor pulls on his own reputation. Because it's not that these people already know what he's capable of, it's that once they look into him, it's like, oh crap. Because it does bother me when the Doctor's just like swaggers in and is like, you know who I am and you should all be scared. I'm like, nah, that usually doesn't work for me so much. But here, where he's like, look up the Doctor. He's like, we have an entry for you. He's like, no, under cause of death. And again, actually kind of tying back to something I mentioned in the Thin Ice review, he's owning the fact that he has killed people way more than the Doctor usually has. He's usually much more evasive about that, in terms of just flat out admitting, I am the cause of death. Not just that I win, that people lose when they stand up against me, people die. And again, like, it feeds back into something done earlier this series. There's just a lot of recurring, awesome stuff that just keeps connecting across this series. This has done a lot to remind me why I like Series 10 so much. I really do love it. And I feel really bad because it seemed like a lot of people didn't like, for some for reasons that I share, others for reasons that I don't, who kind of like felt everything came apart in Series 8 and 9. And I feel like a lot of people prejudged Series 10, assuming that, well, we've already had 2 series under Moffat and Capaldi. I know what it is, and it's not going to be any better than what it's already been. But it is. It's so good, you people. I mean, Extremis. Love it. You rewatched it lately? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I have a Patreon. It is what pays the bills, keeps this entire operation up and running. And there's also the usual stuff you can do that all helps me out. Like, share, subscribe. I like comments regardless because I do really love engaging with you people. But you also don't have to do any of it because, end of the day, you're the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.